Good morning, Zarif. Welcome to Money Square.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. It was good seeing you at Startup Summit.
Thank you.
So আজকে আমরা একটু কথা বলবো তোমার সেশন নিয়ে। তুমি একটা সেশন নিয়েছিলে why invest in Bangladesh, and সেখানে তিনটা টেকঅ্যাওয়ে ছিল, if I remember correctly. তুমি যদি সামারাইজ করতে পারো, what were the three takeaways from your session?
Of course. Okay, so when Sammy asked me to be a moderator at the summit, I was really excited about it. And I was excited because it's good to reflect a little bit on where Bangladesh is today versus where it was maybe 5 years ago. So it's important to realize that, look, you've got 180 mobile cellular users. The consumption in the market is going up. There's, pretty good optimism. The savings rate of over 34%, which is above the global average of 27%, and the fact that the median age is 28 and almost 70% of the population is in a working age is all very good. And based on the report that we released, we really like the fact that beyond the ready-made garments industry and beyond the foreign workers, there is a rise of these businesses that are aggressive, that are growing, and really want to participate in the startup ecosystem themselves. So all of that, it felt like the right time to have a discussion on startups. I think the trick is, of course, to find startups that have a product or a service that's really relevant for the domestic market, because I think that's where the majority of the opportunity is, and also to find a management team that are bold, that are professional, that are ambitious. And so maybe the three takeaways for me in spending the 2 days in the summit was I felt people could be bolder. I felt that they could think bigger. That's sort of the first thing for me, because I compare it to, let's say, the ambition of startups that I see in Indonesia or India or Philippines. And somehow I know the markets are bigger just in terms of number of consumers, but somehow I think in some of these other markets, they think big, like really, really big. And so one message I wanted to land with any startup is you got to think big. And what I liked about some of the startups is they talked about how, they have 100,000 customers, but 100,000 customers is 1% of all the potential customers. For me, that's awesome. Or saying that they have a truck logistics product which makes them a market leader, but even as a market leader, they're a small fraction of the overall market. So I think the idea of thinking big is really important, because when you go to foreign investors, one thing foreign investors look for is how big is your ambition. And that's sort of the first thing, right? So whether the investor is a company like Sequoia or the IFC, they really look for how big the ambition is. And they look for your ambition from a reputational standing perspective. So they go and they speak with your competitors, they speak with your customers, they speak with your vendors, and they want to make sure that your ambition is big and everyone around you believes that you can be big. Okay. That's sort of message one. Be big, think big.
So taking on that cue, so how would you recommend that our startups start thinking big?
Okay. Thinking big starts with starting small. And what that means is you gotta get the basics right. You gotta make sure that all your paperwork is right. You gotta make sure that your product fits the market need. And you gotta be able to take baby steps to make sure that you can manage the cash. In the worst times and the best times, you can plan for cash. So you think big by starting small. That's message number one. Because অনেক সময় হয় কি স্টার্টআপ গুলি বলে যে আমার খুব টাকা দরকার বড় হওয়ার জন্য, টাকা না হলে ব্যবসা শেষ. It doesn't work that way. You've got to be able to think responsibly so that in the best of times and the worst of times, you have a path. So think big by starting small. That's the first thing. Get the basics right. The second thing that you have to do is you have to find people who have thought big and who have failed, who have thought big and who have succeeded. And you've got to build those relationships with more senior people. And just be humble. Go to them and say, আমি একটা ব্যবসা চেষ্টা করছি, এটা আমার আইডিয়া, আপনি ব্যবসা করেছেন, আপনি ফেল করছেন, আপনি succeed করেছেন. Don't comment on them, but the point is you got to surround yourself with people and learn from them and say, actually, what can I learn from people who've tried? So look, some of the biggest startups in Bangladesh have fabulous valuations, but have a really hard time exiting. That's
Okay.
right? Or some of them have wonderful products, but just haven't been able to figure out what's the next space to get into. So when you talk to people as a startup, you essentially think, আমার 1 বছর 2 বছর 3 বছর 4 বছর পর প্রবলেমটা কি হবে? And how do I think about the problems that are going to come? Because there will be problems, and how do I plan for it? So the second is find people who are a bit more senior than you, who've gone through the path. That's the second thing. The third thing is, raising money comes super, super early, and you got to have your game face on all the time. So এবার আমি যখন গেলাম startup summit-এ, আমি অনেক কোম্পানির সাথে কথা বললাম, and I always was saying, can you tell me about your company? আমি পড়েছি ওখানে, আমার ফ্যামিলি আমার হিস্ট্রি ওই, আমি এটা চিন্তা করছি ওটা চিন্তা করছি, and I was like, okay, but tell me about the company. You have, I always say you have one chance at making a first impression, and so you need at a very early point just to make sure that you've got that first impression locked in. What's the pitch? In fact, সাগর, আমি যখন যাচ্ছিলাম ইভেন্টের পরে আমাকে তো বিভিন্ন লোক ধরলো, জারিফ ভাই ছবি নিব, জারিফ ভাই আমার কোম্পানি জারিফ ভাই আমার কোম্পানি ওই. Only one guy, while I was waiting for the car, just waited, and then said, জারিফ ভাই আমার কোম্পানি হলো এই, আমার ব্যবসা হলো ওই, আমি গত 1 বছরে আমার সেলস হলো এই, আপনার সাথে খুব কথা বলা দরকার, আপনাকে অলরেডি লিঙ্কডইন মেসেজ পাঠিয়েছি, কালকে আপনার সকাল 10টার সময় হবে নাকি? Wow, fantastic. I talked to them, by the way, but that's what you need to get ready for. Okay.
All right. Great. So যেটা মনে হচ্ছে যে এখনো আমাদের especially early stage founder, there's a lot to learn on that aspect. Even when the opportunity is presented to you, if you're not prepared, then that's an opportunity missed. And I think a vast majority is missing those opportunities, even when we are presenting.
That's right.
In a summit like this, where you have mix of founders, mentors, investors gathering, but they're just missing the point. Okay. So তোমার একটা সেশনে তুমি যেটা 3টা পয়েন্ট বলেছিলে, তোমার when you moderate a session,
2035. That's right. 2035. Think big and find your secret sauce.
Yeah. So you talked about think big. Secret sauce কি একটু explain করবা?
First of all, I must tell you that I've never come across a founder who was not charming. You gotta have some charm. You gotta have that secret sauce. You have to have a way to attract people to you.
Right.
I don't know if it's smiling more. I don't know if it's, I don't know what it is, but you need to have that charisma to attract people to you. So part of the secret sauce is find what attracts people to you. It could be you're very earnest. It could be that you are very passionate about what you're doing. But the first step is making sure that the energy that you give is really positive. You got to be positive. You got to be like, the best part about watching Shark Tank is not the ideas, but just watch the attitudes of the people. The guys who get the money are the ones who have great positive attitudes. That's the first thing. Have a great positive attitude. That's number one. The second thing is you have no more than 30 seconds to make that first impression. And that's got to be, this is my idea. This is why it's a great idea. This is why I think we should talk about it. And this is the one thing I want from you. So part of the secret sauce is making sure that for every conversation you have, you are super well prepared. before you meet the person, you gotta say, okay, একটু research করলাম, LinkedIn এ গেলাম, Facebook এ গেলাম. What does this person care about, and how do I make sure that I connect with that individual? Because
Right.
unless you can connect with the individual, it's no good. That's number two. And number three is, আজকালকার দিন এত স্টার্টআপ হয়ে গেছে মুস্তাফিজ ঢাকায়,
Yeah.
মানুষ ঠিক বুঝতে পারছে না, how is your startup better or different,
Right.
and it comes down to what people say about you. So just make sure that every experience that you have with people around you is always professional, always courteous, and always leaves people feeling very good about you. You don't want to be that
Awesome.
guy that people speak badly about. Be that guy where people say, হ্যাঁ ওর সাথে কথা বললাম আমার খুব ভালো লাগলো, ওর আইডিয়াটা ভালো, আমি হেল্প করতে চাই ওকে. So be professional and courteous at all times.
Awesome. I mean, these are very simple, right? These are
Completely.
very simple tweaks, and hopefully, I think, is it? Why do you think we kind of fail to adopt this? Is it education? Is it culture? Why we don't get this?
I think আমাদের মনে একটু ভয়, বুঝছো? কেন
Why?
জানি একটু ভয়.
Fear.
হ্যাঁ, একটু ভয় আছে
So
আমাদের
it
মনের
is
ভিতরে.
is it is it is a lack of confidence then? Like,
I think একটু
ভয়টা
একটু
কোত্থেকে আসছে?
একটু 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 lack of confidence. এক নম্বর. দুই
Okay.
নম্বর হলো আমাদের যখন কনফিডেন্সে থাকে না, আমরা কথা বেশি বলি, আমরা কথা
Right.
কম শুনি. And
Sure.
God gave you one mouth and two ears for a reason. So,
Yeah.
spend the time listening. I know you tell me this all the time that I should spend more time listening. But spend the time listening. When you listen, you learn so much more. So I
Absolutely.
think, I don't think it's anything to do with upbringing. I don't think anything to do with culture. You know, we should feel pretty good about being Bangladeshi, especially today. We should feel
Yeah.
good.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Being Bangladeshi, so
Yeah.
related to Bangladesh, তোমার একটা question ছিল, okay, according to BCG report, you talked
Yeah.
about $1 trillion economy of Bangladesh, and you projected that by 2040 we will reach that goal. But when you took an audience poll at the summit in your session, everybody, and like vast majority said it is 2030. Why do you think there is this disparity? And why do you think people are overly optimistic that we'll reach that $1 trillion economic goal like 5 years earlier than what your report is saying?
So I think young people are more optimistic, Shagor, than old
Yeah,
people like you and me.
sure.
So sorry to
No,
make
it's
you.
fine.
Yeah. but I think young people are very hopeful,
Yeah.
and I think they're willing to take risk, and they say, what the heck, 2035 অসুবিধা কি, তাও তো অনেক দূরে,
Yeah.
তাও তো 12 বছর
Mm.
দূরে না, অথবা 11 বছর দূরে, কত কিছু হতে পারে 10 বছরে, অনেক কিছু হতে পারে তো না.
Right.
I mean,
I mean,
I still remember when a couple of years ago we got really excited about this strange-looking dummy that would speak to you, sitting next to you. I can't remember. It was like, I don't know what it was, like some sort of robotic lady who
yeah.
you say hello to
Yeah.
and they respond to you.
Yeah.
Oh my God! Now with generative AI, we don't need that. It's like everywhere.
Yeah.
You have deep fakes. You have people who are making presentations on the computer for you. It's amazing. So the rate of change is so dramatic. So I think people in Bangladesh are young, they're optimistic, they believe in 10 years so much can happen. And that's why
Okay.
2035.
So again, the recipe for Bangladesh success, as you say, is our youth. At the same time, we also lack confidence and we don't think big enough. That could be also an Achilles heel that we need to kind of change, right?
So I
In
think,
other words,
I think, okay, so, um, you got to look at countries like South Korea, you got to look at countries like Philippines, you have to look at countries like South Africa,
Vietnam.
Vietnam, and you got to say, look, what have some of these countries done? And so what some of these countries did is, first of all, they said, in a few sectors, we want to be a global player.
Right.
Philippines said, I want to do that in the outsourcing space, right? Vietnam said, I want to do that in the light engineering and manufacturing space. Korea said, I want to do that in the heavy equipment manufacturing space. So I think each country made a decision that there was a space that they were going to just really
Yeah.
hone in and double down on. And I feel like Bangladesh is starting to make that mental shift from we're going to be a very labor-based, manufacturing-based economy to somewhere where, you know, technology can be a meaningful part of the economy. So I think that shift is gradual but very important. That's the first thing I would
Right.
say. The second thing is, you know, technology as described by a 50-year-old is very different to technology described by a 20-year-old. And the fact that the majority of people in Bangladesh are 28, the fact that we have this massive gig economy gives me a great deal of confidence that the youth of Bangladesh can be a massive contributor to this technology as a sector ambition. That's the second thing. The third thing is Bangladeshis have an ability to learn so fast, whether it's in art, whether it's in work, whether it's in life. I find Bangladeshis learn pretty quickly. And now that you're globally connected as a Bangladeshi, you can learn from anyone and anywhere at any time. The trick, of course, is we need to find a way where what we learn is learned for the medium and longer term. Because if you sort of learn for the short term, you're going to have lots of booms and busts. So the biggest thing for this young population that's getting into technology is to recognize that there's sort of a 5 to 10 year period where you got to invest to learn. It impacts our education system. It impacts the jobs that people have. It impacts where people put their money. And 10 years, as you know, is a long time. So that's the trick, which is how do you pace people to learn slowly and steadily? That's the big thing.
Okay. Interesting. So you've been around almost like when we started doing this startup activities,
Yeah.
since 2013. So it's almost been a decade. So being, so close, but also being a little far, as your job kind of brings you here, and again, you go back, and then you frequently come, and you're frequently coming these days. What are the changes that you've seen, say, last 10 years happen? Like three things or two things that really caught your eye in technology space?
So I think the first is I'm seeing more startups with products and services that are better fit for the market. So I like that.
Okay.
I like the fact that these young companies are coming up with solutions that really address a need. For me, that's
Mm,
comforting. The second thing I find is the people who are in the leadership capacity, actually, they're interesting. They've all had either a background in engineering or technology, or they've actually been in a startup, or they happen to be in a family business where you can scale the startup, so they're in distribution in a business where you're trying to distribute secondhand handphones,
mm,
or they happen to be in energy when the business is in smart energy solutions. So I like that. So I think the profile of the companies is very different. That's the first thing. I think the leadership teams are different, but what remains a concern is how the regulatory environment can adapt as quickly to the very hungry startups. So today, for example, as I understand, if a startup wants to raise money,
mm,
there's a question on what's the value of the company. And even if I am a investor and I say that the value of the company is X,
mm.
you have to have independent Bangladesh bank approval of that value. And how do you apply a book value to a losing company, a cash flow negative company? So I think there is a need to figure out things like how do you value a company? It seems small, but important, right?
Mm.
The second is we still have to build technology capabilities. And I think we just have to figure out how do we get access to technology outside of the country in the meantime, just technologists, while we scale businesses. But overall, I think, these companies look pretty good.
Okay. Um, Now, after attending the startup session, what
Yep.
was, say, best thing that you experienced?
I loved how packed it was, Shagor.
Hmm.
It was, I mean, you couldn't even breathe.
Right.
Air conditioning bhula jao.
এখন she was failing.
টোটাল ফেলিয়ার। মানে আমি যখন আগে আসছিলাম মনে
হ্যাঁ,
হচ্ছে মানে সিট খালি ছিল। এখন
হ্যাঁ,
যেখানে গেলাম যে কোনো সেশনে গেলাম দেখি সিট ফুল,
yeah,
মানুষজন করিডোরে কথা বলছে। So it was not so much for me about the number of people who came from overseas. I just felt
yeah,
the buzz was much better this time. People were really excited and they were
yeah.
really there. So I think that for me is good. Good progress. So
Okay.
my hats off to the guys who organized it and Sammy for really doing a good job.
Yeah, they did a great job, Sarah Bangladesh. It was
Yeah.
the first event and they had a very short time planning
Yeah.
this, but fantastic event. Um, what would you like if you had to change something to make it better, the experience better, or the impact, more impact? What would you suggest?
I think you gotta have a longer summit.
Longer, like more than
Longer.
2 days?
Yeah, you gotta go longer. I think you gotta go outside of Dhaka to make it really immersive.
Hmm.
And you actually have to find a way to solve for some of
Show
the
Bangladesh,
things. Yeah,
like
not
show
really.
Bangladesh?
I think so. I think, one of the things that people were saying is, they fly in, they fly out, and they don't really get a sense for Bangladesh. And I think that you have to make it immersive. You got to get people outside of Dhaka. There's a great book that I'm reading called Stealing Fire. And this book
Hmm.
talks about the importance. Have you read the book? It's an awesome book,
No, no,
Stealing
no.
Fire. So basically, the whole theory is that, you need to create this state of heightened excitement. And the way that you create a state of heightened excitement among founders or teams is by taking them away from what they know day to day and introducing some element of adrenaline. And so, it talks about Richard Branson and how he makes everyone skydive before having a meeting.
Yeah,
It's the weirdest thing, right? But the whole point is when you get people into this state of adrenaline,
right.
then people get really creative. So I think it's a great thing. Have it for another day, have it outside of Dhaka, and make people feel very different.
Yeah,
Because, Dhaka is just part of Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is pretty cool.
right. Awesome. So, um, we are almost the last segment. You had a report, it was last year, the trillion-dollar economy.
Yeah, yeah.
So, are we expecting anything this year?
A report this year.
Yeah, from
I'm,
BCG.
Sure.
No comments. Or
No. So okay. So one of the ideas that's germinating, and no way it's going to come out this year, in fact, is the power of women in our
Hmm.
economy. Because I think it's an extraordinary driving force, and I
Yeah,
think as we think about topics like, in fact, socially responsible or sustainable, I personally have found that women entrepreneurs are pretty clued in on a lot of these topics, and they sort of live it and
right.
breathe it. And so I'm excited about doing something in that space. Not this year, but next year maybe.
Okay, great. I
Yeah,
think that's an interesting point. I think one of the things that differentiates us and our big neighbor, India, is like we have more women participation in workforce than
yeah,
India, and I think that had a huge economic multiplier effect.
yeah.
So you're right, Sam.
Yeah. I mean, I
That would
know.
be great.
I mean, I know. I don't speak just for myself, but for many others. My
Hmm.
biggest supporter and my biggest critic still is my mom. Still.
Okay.
I'm telling you, she's still like, have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this? It's so
Right.
funny. But, I feel like, and she's an entrepreneur. So I think there is something there that we should be exploring a bit further.
Awesome. So with that, we would be expecting something interesting, and I think from BCG that would be very different take. Like most of the reports that we have done, like the first one, you talked about the Mac population, and I think that really caught everybody's eyes, like how it's growing, and the fact that it can be such a large component for economy uh, that can be comparable to other developing economies, the size of our Mac population. So that was an interesting side. Your second report, which we talked about, the $1 trillion economy of Bangladesh, where it will be 2040, that really kind of, thinking big, or what, the country can reach as an economic size, that also got a lot of people thinking about, a trillion-dollar economy. Like, you guys almost like coined that, Bangladesh
We
synonymous with
totally
that.
did. I'm gonna start wearing a T-shirt. By the way, it's gonna have like a T on it. I'm gonna Mr. T. It's gonna be my T-shirt. Sure.
Awesome. If you guys do something on the woman,
I think women's it.
yeah, that would be interesting to see, like what
Yeah.
you guys do. I will
That's
really
right.
be curious to see what you guys do. All right,
That's right.
great. Thank you, Zarif, very much for your insights. And take care, man.
Okay.
Bye.
Kudafis. Bye.